Hi, my name is Salma Afifi, and I'll be presenting safelight, which is our recent work on enhancing security in optical convolutional neural network accelerators. So starting off with the outline, I'll first present an introduction on security threats in deep neural networks. I'll then give a quick background on silicon photonics for deep neural network acceleration, followed by a discussion on the attacks on optical CNN accelerators that can happen. Then I'll present the optical neural network accelerator attack susceptibility analysis that we conducted and the hardware Trojan attack mitigation techniques we propose in this work. And finally, I will end with some concluding remarks. So, in terms of security threats in deep neural networks, one of the most common attack types are adversarial attacks. These refer to having maliciously crafted inputs that aim to deceive models while appearing legitimate. In this example, we have here a school bus image after the attacker introduces some adversarial perturbation. While to us this still looks like a school bus image, the model in this case misclassified it into an ostrich. Another famous type of attacks are Trojan attacks. These first can be classified into model Trojans and hardware Trojans. Model Trojans rely on software-based methods where the attackers manipulate the weights to trigger incorrect outputs, for example. Hardware Trojans, on the other hand, can be malicious circuits that activate under specific conditions. So, for example, this can mean having a modified multiplexer logic that completely disrupts the execution. So, SafeLight in specific focuses in this work on hardware Trojans, and prior to this work, hardware Trojan-based attacks on optical neural network accelerators have not been studied before to the best of our knowledge. So just to take a step back, like what are optical neural networks and how do they operate? In this slide, you see the common devices and circuits that are used in most optical non-coherent accelerators. We first have our laser input, which generates the optical signals that then travels in the waveguide. And we have the MR banks, which are composed of the main optical devices, which are the micro ring resonators, or MR for short. And these are optical modulators used for performing the MAC operations. And then we have our digital to analog converters, which convert the model parameter data into analog signals that are used by the electro-optic signal modulating circuits to modulate or imprint this electronic data onto the optical signals. We also have thermo-optic tuning circuits to adjust the MR resonance shifts that can happen due to fabrication and thermal variations. And the optical signal is then detected by a photodetector, which converts the signals into analog values that are then converted back to the digital domain using an analog digital converter. So as you can see here, there are many components to an ONN. SafeLight in specific focuses on attacks that can happen on the thermo-optic tuning circuits and the electro-optic signal modulating circuits, as these type of circuits dictate how the microring resonator or the MRs operate and can completely disrupt the entire execution. So how does an MR operate? If we look at this figure here, on the left, we first see an optical signal with a specific wavelength. However, when the optical signal passes through the MR device, some alteration will happen in the wavelength, and this alteration is specified by the tuning signals applied to the MR device. So one way we can expand on this for perform multiplications. So let's say, for example, we want to perform this vector multiplication of the weight vector by the activation vector. So we would have a similar setup as here, where we have two MR bank arrays. The first one is used to imprint the activation values, and the second one is used to imprint the weight values. So what will happen is when the first signals pass it through the first MRs, the activation values will start to be imprinted onto each optical signal one by one, and then the optical signals pass it through the second set of MRs. When the weight values are imprinted onto the same signals, we end up with a multiplication operation as shown here. And by the end, we get the partial sums that are needed to perform this vector multiplication. And it's important to note here that the different colors indicate that each MR is configured to operate on a specific wavelength or an optical signal with a specific wavelength. So in general, optical neural networks have been gaining a lot of attention recently as they can offer very high throughput and energy efficiency. In fact, Crosslight, which is a state-of-the-art CNN accelerator, was able to achieve 34 times lower energy per bit than the GPU. So moving on to the optical accelerator safelight focuses on. As shown here, the first component is an electronic control unit. This is responsible for tasks such as managing the photonic devices, communicating with the memory, and so on. And then we have the TAC and the ADC arrays, which, as I explained, are responsible to perform the analog to digital and digital to analog conversions. Then for performing the multiplications or the vector dot product operations, we have VTP units. These are the rectangles with MR devices inside, and they're distributed onto two main blocks. The first one is the convolution block. As the name suggests, it's responsible for accelerating the convolution layers in the CNN. And this block is composed of 100 VTP units, and each unit is comprised of 20 by 20 MRs. And then we have the fully connected block, which is composed of 60 VDP units, and each unit is comprised of 150 by 150 MRs. Next, in terms of the attacks we simulated, the first type of attacks are the MR activation attacks. Here, we first assume that an attacker can introduce hardware trojans that specifically target the electro-optic circuits that are used in the signal's activation. And if this is successful, what will happen is that the specific MR targeted will enter an off-resonance state where it no longer becomes tuned to function at the intended wavelength. So in other words, it's not operating as we expect. So to visualize what this means, if you look at this figure, here are the values we expect to see at each stage of operation. However, if the attacker comes and attacks this specific MR, the A2 activation value will never be imprinted onto the second optical signal, and thus, as you see, the value carried by this optical signal will be corrupted or incorrect. The next type of attacks are thermal hotspot attacks, and we first need to understand that the MRs are usually designed to operate upon their assigned carrier wavelength at a specific temperature. If this temperature exceeds a certain threshold, it can cause a shift in the MR's resonance wavelength, meaning that again, the MR will not operate as expected. And to do so, the attacker can come and attack a single heater, which is used in the thermo-optic tuning circuits. And this will cause a localized temperature increase and will not only impact like one specific MR, but it can impact several surrounding MRs. So again, to visualize this, if we look at this figure, again, these are the expected values at each stage. However, in this case, the attacker came and attacked the heater for the MR shown in red, and this resulted in a localized temperature increase, and some of the surrounding MRs were affected as well. And now the values carried by the three optical signals are all incorrect, and the entire MAC operation is just corrupted. So to quantify the effect of such attacks onto our optical CNN accelerator, we first prepared a comprehensive Python simulator that modeled the accelerator's components, devices, and circuits. We modeled the hardware Trojan attacks during inference by modifying the model's parameters based on their mapping to the ONN accelerator. We focus on three different CNN models shown here in this table. And in terms of the attacks, we simulated both activation and hotspot attacks. And we first focus on attacking only 1% of the total MRs, either in the fully connected block only, the convolution block only, or both blocks simultaneously. And we did the same for attacking 5% of the total MRs and 10% of the total MRs. So these are the results we got. In this figure, the vertical lines shown, the dashed lines separate the number of MRs attacked, and the different colors show the type of attack and where it occurred over several runs. So as you can see here, for the CNN with the MNIST dataset, we saw that attacking the convolution block only had the lowest effect. And this is because, like, if you noticed from the models table, this model, the convolution layers had a total number of parameters which was a lot lower than the total number of parameters in the fully connected layers. However, for the ResNet 18 model, we see the exact opposite. Attacking the fully connected block only had the lowest effect. And we can also see here that the hotspot attacks resulted in a much larger accuracy drop than the activation MR attacks. And this is just because the hotspot attacks are naturally more concentrated or targeted than the activation attacks. And finally, for the VG16 model, attacking the convolution layers was also more dominant. And here we also saw that when we attack 10% of the total MRs, either in the convolution block only or both blocks simultaneously, the model became almost completely corrupted. And this is because VG16 is a massive model with over 120 million parameters, which required several mappings onto our accelerator. And attacking 10% of the MRs led to corrupting a very large number of parameters. So if we focus on the worst case scenario, which is a hotspot attack on 10% of the total MRs, for the three models, we saw accuracy drops ranging from 7.49% to 80.46%. In terms of the mitigation techniques we explored, we focus on regularization techniques. These are already widely used to prevent overfitting in CNNs, and L2 regularization in specific is a common technique to improve model robustness and accuracy. We also focus on noise-aware training, which is used to improve generalization and reduce sensitivity in models. And it is a method that's already used in PCM-based AI accelerators to address noise-prone components, which are usually there in PCM-based accelerators. In general, safelight presents a first-time exploration of applying such regularization techniques to try and prevent the hardware Trojan attacks impact. So what we did first is that we took these mitigation techniques and wanted to see their impact on the accuracies without simulating any attacks. And so we compared several CNN model variants, including the original model with L2 regularization technique. And we also combined L2 regularization with noise-aware training using Gaussian noise with standard deviations between 0.1 and 0.9. So this figure here shows the range of accuracies achieved with each CNN model variant. So for the MNIST dataset, or the CNN with the MNIST dataset, we saw that the best accuracies were achieved with the model that had L2 regularization and standard deviation of 0.3 for the Gaussian noise. However, for the ResNet 18 model, the optimal model was that with the standard deviation of 0.5. And finally, for the VG16 model, the optimal model was with a standard deviation of 0.2. As you can see, different models achieved optimal robustness with different noise standard deviations with the regularization. Next, we took these robust models and put them under the hardware Trojan attacks we discussed. And first, for the MNIST model, we saw that in the worst case, when the accuracy drop reached 7.49%, the robust model was actually able to recover up to 5.4% of this lost accuracy. For the ResNet 18 model, in the worst case, again, the accuracy reached 26.4%, of which the robust model was able to recover 21.2%. And finally, for the VG16 model, in the most extreme case where the accuracy drop reached 80.46%, the robust model was able to recover only 30.7%. So, in conclusion, L2 regularization training and Gaussian noise-aware training in most cases can be very effective in compensating for accuracy drops due to the hardware Trojans. Finally, this work, safelight, presented the first comprehensive susceptibility analysis of activation and hotspot hardware Trojan-induced attack scenarios in optical neural networks. And we saw that the application of software-based optimizations can provide a low overhead mechanism to reduce the impact. And we saw also that hardware Trojans corrupting 10% of the total MRs with massive models like VG16 can severely damage the model, and we weren't able to recover most of the accuracy drop. And we saw that different configurations of the mitigation strategies provided robust outcomes for different CNN models. And finally, it was shown that hotspot attacks are in general more difficult to overcome than activation attacks. Thank you, and this is my email for any follow-up questions.